Hey everyone, Brendan Snyder here. How are you? Thank you so much for joining me and welcome to a special review for the Masters of Metal, Metallica, and their brand new album, 72 Seasons. This just came out on April 14th of 2023 and it is their 11th studio album. We're going to break it down here in all different capacities and everything. We'll do an unboxing, all that great stuff. But before we get started, if you're new to my channel and you haven't already hit the subscribe button, please do. Also leave a comment, hit like, all those things help support my channel. I would greatly appreciate it. And of course, as an added bonus, by subscribing, you'll be able to stay up to date on really cool episodes just like this with a special review for the brand new Metallica album, 72 Seasons. So I want to jump back a bit and give a little bit of history here just to set the context for what it is I'm going to talk about during the review. So the band itself formed in 1981. So at this year, it puts them at 42 years that they've been around, which is really impressive. Released a total of 11 studio albums. Their fifth studio album, the Black Album from 1991, is actually the largest selling metal album of all time. 17 million copies alone sold in the US. The Black Album did for metal what essentially Nirvana's Nevermind did for grunge and alternative rock. It really just broke it wide at that time. But the band's follow-up, Load, in 1996 was really less thrash, sort of with the band jumping on the trend of groove metal at that time. Very different, wasn't what people expected and so forth. Since that time, they've kind of blended both of them and released 5 more studio albums, albeit far less frequently too. Death Magnetic in 2008, and then 8 years until the follow-up Hardwired to Self Destruct. Another 7 years follow-up until we get to this one, the one we want to talk about, 72 Seasons. So as I mentioned, 11th studio album. They started the process for this in 2019, and the band, vowed to get it done sooner than the last 2 albums. And while they did by 1 year, not by much, because it still took them 7 years to do this one here. It does feature 12 bone-crushing songs on it, 77 minutes long, all on one disc, and I'm very happy about that. As we all know, the last album, Hardwired, was split onto 2 discs, even though it would have actually fit all on one disc. They broke it down that way for different reasons, sales purposes and stuff like that, and just how it all gets recognized in terms of streaming. But this album here, we are back to having it all on one disc, and I'll touch on that a bit more later as well. Produced by Greg Fidelman, who did the production on their last album, Hardwired to Self Destruct, in 2016. So no surprise that it actually has the same sound as those last 2 albums. But I also want to point out that he's the former Rhino Bucket guitar player, now turned producer for Metallica. So I find it kind of interesting that we got a glam metal guy now producing Metallica when there was so much bad blood back there between glam metal bands like Winger and Metallica and stuff like that. But that's a whole different thing. Let's stay on topic here and move into the review. So I'm kind of split on this. I've got 2 different opinions on it. Part of me loves the album itself. Every song on here is heavy. There's no ballads on here. James Hetfield's vocals are great, better than the last couple albums in my opinion. I'm just really liking it here. They were too raw on the last couple albums in my opinion. Kirk Hammett's solos are on par. He's in fine form, although I have heard people who are complaining about his soloing, and I'm not surely where that's coming from on here, because I think each one is very fitting for the song that it is on and part of. So I think it's a good job done. Lars Ulrich's drumming is amazing, as he always is. I mean, there's usually no question about that, albeit, that drum sound that was on Saint Anger and whatnot. But the drumming was still good, even though we didn't like the drum sound. And Robert Trujillo's bass playing seems to be the biggest change for me. It's the thing that really stands out the most on this album as somebody who's really grown by leaps and bounds. I'm really liking how he's been featured on this album here. Now, to the opposite, the other side of me feels that this album is too long, and that was something that I wanted to touch on again, with that idea that they broke down the last album. And in that case, with both of those discs being around 40 minutes or so, or a little less, I felt that those were too short. So I'm glad to have it back, but then at the same time, now I'm just feeling this is too long. Generally all sounds the same, and I think that's my biggest point to make here, is that most of this is all done in the groove metal style. There's very little actual thrash metal on this, but then a lot of bands are like that, where what they did back in the 80s they're just not doing today. Maybe poor examples, but Def Leppard, Bon Jovi, big bands like that people always want to go back to that 80s sound, Metallica being another one of them. Isn't happening here on this, and I think fans of the old are going to be disappointed, but then they've been disappointed for the last near 30 years at this point, I think. Very little mix up in terms of the styles on here, and that's where I'm getting at with the idea that I'm saying I think that it all sounds the same. Yes, each track is uniquely different, and the playing is different and so forth, but style-wise it's all the same, and it really took several listens to get into it to distinguish one track from the other on here. As I mentioned, there's no ballads, so there's nothing on here like Nothing Else Matters or Mama Said, and I'm kind of okay with that. I was never a big fan of those, but there's also no songs on here that start slow and build and then get heavy, like Fade to Black, Welcome Home Sanitarium, or One. And I've always been a fan of those songs, and I think they're a key signature style to what Metallica is, and to not have something similar in vein to one of those on here is kind of a big letdown, at least in my opinion. And then there's no all-out thrash masterpieces on here like Creeping Death or Master of Puppets, and you would think the band, having just had huge recognition and newfound success from younger fans and everything due to Stranger Things and the key placement of the song Master of Puppets within that movie or TV show, that they would have worked some of that into this. But glad to see that they're not just recording for recording's sake, trying to make something to cash in. They chose to write this. This is what came out of them, and it's what they're putting out. So I end up feeling like the album and its 12, of the same sort of style song that's on here, which is not necessarily a bad thing. They're all good songs. They all stand out in my opinion. Each one is in fine form in and of itself, but I tend to like more peaks and valleys in my music. I like to have the highs, the lows, the slow parts, the fast parts, that sort of stuff. I like to have intro pieces that then build into something new that when the song kicks off, and there's not a lot of that here on this. But it's sort of like AC/DC. We all love that band, and they've made the same album and the same songs for their 40 going on near 50-year career at this point. So Metallica making an album of all one style isn't really that out of the ordinary for bands to do. And I kind of dig it. Like I said, no ballads. There's nothing to break the flow on this album. They're all very good. Now, if we get into the actual songs themselves here, so standout tracks for me are really the 4 singles that have been released. Now, that may be because I've been listening to those a lot leading up to this album, and so they stand out in my mind far more than anything else did on here. But as playing the album, they really did stand out as some of the best tracks that were on here. So 72 Seasons, track number 1, track 3, Screaming Suicide, track 6, Lux Eterna, which was the first single, and track 9, If Darkness Had a Sun. The song 72 Seasons is really about the most thrash oriented song on here, along with Lux Eterna. Everything else on here is pretty much straight groove metal on it, so I was kind of expecting to have some heavier style stuff than what had been released as the singles, but it's just not the case in my opinion. Beyond that, track number 4, Sleeping My Life Away. I really enjoy that one here. The opening bass riffing on it is really cool, and then about 55 seconds into the song, it really kicks at that point. But again, it just lets Robert shine for a bit. And it's the sort of, again, this is groove metal, but it's that groove that it kicks into is very memorable and sticks with me for a very long time after. Another one, track 7, Crown of Barbed Wire, I really like. I don't know if this is just because the word crown is in the title here, but it reminds me a lot, sort of has a kinship to King Nothing off of Load. Lots of interesting parts on this song that I think works to the song's advantage for keeping it very interesting all throughout. And I think my favorite track on here is actually the last one, track 12, Inamorata. This one here is the longest song on the album at 11 minutes, and I have heard some people say that they feel the song is too long, and there's some lines in it that I do think get a bit repetitive in it, but musically, I absolutely love this song. It's also probably the most musically different of all the tracks on the album, which is kind of understandable why they put it at the end, but maybe if they moved it up a little bit more in it, you would get a sense of that sort of peak and valley feel. This one here is probably closest representative to something like The Unforgiven, which gets us a little bit out of that straight groove metal sound, but I do very much like this song, track 12, Inamorata. So let's take a peek at this. There's the front cover of it, and there's the back side of it, which it's it's die cut into it, 72 seasons, so very cool. I will say I don't like the fact that it doesn't say Metallica anywhere on it. We just get the M on there, but I do like it when we get the logos and stuff. Now, the one from the thumbnail is this here that you saw, and I did want to point this out. Some of the places are giving away guitar picks. So 3 of them, 2 yellow, 2 black, at least in my pack. I don't know if they're all broken down the same way, but Metallica 72 Seasons is what says on that. And then you can see here where it's got the logo and stuff like that, but it's just a sticker on it. But there you go, there's the cover, and then this thing slides out from it like that. And I want to show you on the back side, because if you can't already tell, that's James Hetfield there, and when we slide that out, we get the face much bigger. Now on the front side, when it comes out, says the 72 Seasons there on it, Metallica, and we have James on this side now. But the way that this opens is, and you can see it already starting to pop up, so you need the sleeve over it. We get the other faces, and of course we get Lars next. Kind of surprised Lars isn't first. He likes to have all the attention, so you'd kind of think that. And we get next in line Kirk, and the last member there, Robert. And then when we fold that down, we sort of get this cross thing, but it's what's holding the booklet in place. So my biggest complaint on this is, as you notice with the 72 Seasons part of this on the back side and the front side, there is nowhere on this that states the track listing, except once I've gotten it all the way open, the tracks are there on it. So I really have to open everything and leave this thing sitting up like this if I want to read the tracks. Disc is inside it, and the disc itself has the tracks on it. And when we pop that out, it's just yellow. There's nothing extra that's on the underside of that. But then with the booklet, there's nowhere in here that has the tracks either. There's also no more photos of the band. We just get that one big blow up photo. You get the lyrics in here, which is always good. You get some more stuff that ties into all the burnt things from childhood and stuff, growing up, representing those 72 seasons, the first 18 years of somebody's life, the definitive time frame of defining who someone is and that sort of stuff. So I've got a little bit of issue with the packaging. It's a little cumbersome. I like a pure jewel case whenever I can have that. I kind of wish they would do those as deluxe packagings and still put out jewel case versions, but at least so far we don't have that, although I have found that in time, usually they stop manufacturing the deluxe edition packaging, and they usually later go into jewel cases. So if you're like me and you want that, maybe in a year or two we'll start to see that. But bottom line on this album is, I think if you like the last 2, Death Magnetic and Hardwired to Self Destruct, you're going to love this album here. As I said, no bad songs on here. They all stand out to some degree, have their own character, that sort of stuff, making each one very cool. My only complaint on here, besides with the packaging, is that they all sort of have the same feel to them. There isn't much in terms of a varied style throughout. Sort of, the way that I think past albums have had much more varied styles on them. And all in all, though, I do think this album is worth checking out. I would recommend it to any of the Metallica fans that have enjoyed their later era, the newer sound from the last few albums and so forth. It's not to say that earlier fans won't enjoy it, but there generally seems to be a dividing line down where the first 5 albums older fans are into, and then they didn't like anything. And if you like the stuff that came later, you're pretty much into this. But if you were one of the ones from the beginning, maybe not. But I think it's a great album. I do recommend it. Like I said, I've got 2 sides of this. One side of me says I really love what's going on here, and the other side of me says it sounds a little bit all the same. But we'll leave that final decision up to you guys. Otherwise, hopefully you enjoyed this review. It gave you some insight, something to go out and think about with the album itself, and at least do give it a listen and go from there. All right, everyone, take care, have a good one, and I'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye.